the main challenge for Asher is going to be this emotional, this psychological challenge of carrying this burden. When I thought about this issue and this problem, I had nothing to help. And the more that we talked with other parents, caregivers, and other people living with type 1, they all said the same thing. This was a lived experience of feeling that he had been close to death in some way or another, and that this was something that could happen to him again, and probably would happen to him again. The things that you have to look out are the 4 T's, as they're called: tiredness, thirst, a toilet, often going to urinate frequently, and weight loss. Diabetes is about managing a lifelong health condition that is with you for every second of every day. I didn't just want to make some films that were, our poor me, look at type 1 diabetes, isn't it sad? I wanted to make some films that had some practical applications that we could start to talk about and think about and use. So the first third of the film will tell the younger person's story.
Welcome back to Drug Diaries, the podcast where we delve into the stories, science, and human experiences that shape the world of healthcare and drug discovery. Today's episode is deeply personal and profoundly inspiring. Imagine for a second being told that your child has a condition that will require constant vigilance for every meal, every activity, and every moment of their life. Imagine the emotional toll that would take not just on the child, but on the entire family. Now consider this. Every year, over 200,000 to 355,000 children and adolescents are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes worldwide, a chronic condition that requires them to balance their blood sugar levels with needles, devices, and an unrelating sense of responsibility, all while navigating the joys and challenges of childhood. Despite the incredible advancement in medicine, type 1 diabetes is more than just a physical condition. It's an emotional and psychological battle that demands resilience from children, from teens, and their families. But how often do we really talk about the emotional side of this condition? How often do we hear the stories behind the statistics? Today's guest is someone who knows these challenges intimately. Simon Ruben is an acclaimed filmmaker, but more importantly, he's a father. His son Asher was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 6, a moment that would reshape their family's life forever. Simon's personal journey didn't end there. He has taken that experience, every struggle, every triumph, and poured it into a powerful new project. He is on a mission to change how we see type 1 diabetes, not just as a medical condition, but as a human experience. In this episode, we'll explore Simon's journey as a father, the ambitious project he's working on, and the impact he hopes it'll have on families, healthcare providers, and the world at large. Simon, welcome to Drug Diaries.
Thank you very much, Kaushik, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. You hit the nail on the head.
Thank you, Simon. Simon, can you start by sharing your son Asher's journey with type 1 diabetes, and what was it like for him and your family when he was first diagnosed?
Yeah, great question. It's, as you said, the diagnosis really takes over life. So to go back 7.5 years ago is near on impossible, but it was a body blow for Asher and for the whole family to try to articulate what it is like to be on your life's journey. You're not really aware of where you're at until something profound happens to knock you off course. And we realized that we had all these expectations and understandings about what our life was like, would be like, should be like, and what Asher's life would be like. And all of a sudden, all of that was thrown into question and into doubt. So Asher was 5 years old. He started to display very common symptoms of type 1. The things that you have to look out are the 4 T's, as they're called: tiredness, thirst, toilet, often going to urinate frequently, and I forgot the last T, weight loss. I'm sure what the T stands for there. And it was absolutely terrible. He was 5 years old. He was going to bed with raking thirst. He couldn't drink enough, but then he was waking up and urinating in the night. And he would wet the bed sometimes. And as parents, we had no idea about these symptoms. And so we were sort of, still feel so guilty to this day. We were sort of trying to limit the amount that he was drinking, even though he was so parched, so that he wouldn't wet the bed. I don't know how long this went on for, maybe a week or so, before we realized something quite serious was going on. We took him to the GP, and immediately the GP sent us off to the hospital. And I will never forget that moment. The consultant sat me down, my wife was at work, and said, you know, I'm very sorry to tell you that Asher has type 1 diabetes. And it was almost as if I was in a strange bubble, and I hadn't quite understood what she'd said. I knew it was bad. I knew that it was a lifelong condition, but it landed but didn't land. I sort of was there and wasn't there. And I remember him looking up at me sort of for reassurance, and sort of reading in my face that it was serious and that I was upset. But also I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. I didn't really know what it all meant. And from that moment on, it was just a very, very steep, should we say vertical, learning curve for a new life and a new understanding of health and a new appreciation. You know, it's very easy to look back now and talk about gratitude and appreciation. At the time, you know, we were sinking. There was very little of that, but it really was the beginning of a new appreciation of our lives, of our family, and particularly of Asher as well.
Right. And what were some of the biggest challenges your family faced in adapting to life with type 1 diabetes?
It's an insidious condition. It permeates everything. So it's a very difficult question to answer, but you know, it's really changed a lot for Asher over time. But to start with, when he was first diagnosed, you know, he was 5 years old. He didn't want to have injections. He didn't want to be stuck with needles. Yeah. He didn't want to have finger pricks. He was upset. And he was incredibly angry, actually, which was very healthy. And, you know, looking back at it all now, we're so wonderfully pleased at his very healthy reaction to it all. We've heard of the full gamut of reactions, and his was quite normal and positive in a way. So that was the main thing. And as a parent, to, you know, literally hold down your child, to chase them around the room and hold them down kicking and screaming, to give them an injection every time they want to eat something is tricky, to say the least. So that was the initial, I would say, the biggest challenge was just compliance with the regime that is required with insulin therapy. And I think then also as a small child, it was then coming to terms, both with my wife and I, and as a family, but for him, you could see, because he was so young, you could see his emotional world developing around the understanding that this was a lifelong condition. So that was very, very hard. We understood that. That was hard for us, but then actually watching him slightly delayed to us, also realizing and understanding that was also very hard. And then over the years, the challenges have been numerous. I would say it's a fickle beast, type 1.
Yes. One
of the biggest challenges, on one day, you do exactly the same things. You do everything correct. You manage it in the way you're supposed to manage it, and you get excellent results. Yes. And you pat yourself on the back and feel good about life and the world and yourself. And then the next day, you have exactly the same set of things, you do everything right, and you have awful results without anything that you can necessarily pin down on why. And so that forever changing, sort of amorphous face of type 1, I would say is very, very challenging. And then I suppose what has really led us to this conversation today is probably the main and biggest thing, which has taken us a while to realize, I have to say, is just the profound burden of carrying type 1. And, you know, in a way, I don't have type 1. I help, my wife and I help Asher to carry type 1. And soon, you know, one day it'll be his to carry by himself. And that's a heavy weight. And that really is by far the most challenging aspect, I would say, of type 1.
Right. And what adjustments did you and your family make to help Asher live a fulfilling and normal life despite the condition?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's something that we ask ourselves every day. What are we doing? What can we do? And how do we need to adapt what we're doing? And as Asher grows, both physically and in terms of his personality, we need to constantly change and adapt. The things that we've done over time, I think I'm one of those people that if there's a problem, I need to research, I need to buy things, I need to, you know, have my practical touch points that I can go to, and as a method of feeling like I have some element of control. And one of the fabulous things about type 1 diabetes and the health landscape is there's some brilliant technologies, there are some brilliant medical tools to really help. Early on, when Asher was diagnosed, we became aware of something relatively new to the market, which was a flash glucose monitor.
Right.
And it wasn't available on the NHS, but we were reading on some of the patient forums that we were on that it was incredibly useful. And most importantly, it would stop the need to continuously prick the fingers to test the blood, which, you know, you could, in a sense, not do enough. But the minimum you'd have to do it would be 5 times a day, you know, I think. And that really takes its toll on the fingers. So we jumped at this, we self-funded getting it, and it was a whole new world of being able to, you tap it with a little device and get the blood glucose readings, and it was incredible, and really changed things for us relatively early. We've spoken to lots of people with type 1 who have, you know, in their 60s, 70s, 80s, who, you know, this was many years without this kind of technology. But for us, thankfully, it was relatively early on. And then we were able to buy another device that sat on top of it, that you sort of taped on top of it, that was a Bluetooth transmitter, so it could send it to our phones. And then over time, those things developed into CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, that did that for you. And the tech has really just developed and developed and developed. Yes. So what we did very early on was get on that tech device roller coaster of understanding what was out there, and there are competing companies, and it's moved very quickly. And so those adaptations have made a profound impact, positive impact, on his and my wife and I and the whole family's feeling about type 1. Just as an aside on the tech, they are amazing, and I would not give them up. But they do come with it's a double-edged sword, because all of that tech needs managing. And when the tech goes wrong, which it's tech, sometimes it does go wrong, it's incredibly disruptive. It's a real bottleneck for your whole management system. So if one little bit goes out, you know, it can suddenly throw the whole day out. And there's also just, you know, it's forever with us. Wow. Right? It's forever with us. It sits by the bed, you know, at night. It's constantly on. There are alarms that go off at various times to warn about hyper and hypoglycemia. So you can really have enough of the tech as well. It's in this incredibly useful tool that has definitely health outcomes are better. But there is a double-edged sword that there's this continuous vigilance, and the tech means it really is continuous. It's there all the time. But other adaptations that we've made, I think are really to how we are as a family, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
emotional side of things, to never use Asher's type 1 as an excuse or a reason to do or not do anything.
Hmm.
And it's very easy. It sounds really obvious, but when you
Yes.
get down into the weeds of everyday family life, it's very easy to do that. And so that was a real mental shift for us. Was sort of, it's almost like having another family member that you sort of have to
Hmm.
take account of, but that you don't want to give them over or under or overestimate their importance. They're
Yeah.
just another part, as part of the furniture, part of the landscape of the family, and that's really important. It took us a while to get there. And I think as well the mental shift that everything, even though type 1 is a pretty profound condition,
Hmm.
it's also one that shouldn't stop someone doing anything that they want to,
Exactly.
more or less. Maybe a fighter pilot or a deep sea diver maybe aren't the best professions to try to follow, but other than that, there really shouldn't be anything that should stop someone with type 1 living a full life. And we were told that very early on by a few people, and it sounded kind of irrelevant to what we were going through at the
Hmm.
time. But I think
Yes.
today that's definitely an adaptation that we have incorporated, is that anything is possible. We're not going to stop doing anything that we want, and we wouldn't stop Asher doing anything that he wants either.
Right. And how has this affected Asher's school life, his social activities, his sports activities, and overall uh, school life?
It's an excellent question, and I think as Asher is now in secondary school and he's a couple of years away from his GCSEs, but as things become more serious, the effects are more profound.
Hmm.
Early on at school, he was at primary school, he was 5 years old. The idea of leaving him at school was very difficult to hand over insulin to these wonderful teachers and support
Hmm.
staff, but they were dealing with 30 children and there were other things going
Yes.
on, and insulin is this incredibly powerful hormone, and the amounts required to cover the carbohydrates in food to bring your sugar levels down versus the amount required to send you hypoglycemic, and the
Hmm.
amount then required to send you dangerously low,
Oh, yes.
we're talking about very small increments in
That's
dosage.
correct.
So if you dial up a notch on an insulin pen one click too far, or if you miscalculate,
Hmm.
the consequences are can be quite profound.
Yes.
So early on, school was very difficult in order to think about handing him over and thinking about his safety.
Hmm.
I have to say his school were absolutely fabulous.
Right.
The hospital sent a diabetes specialist nurse who did some training at the school, which was incredible. And really, after a very short period of time, we felt very comfortable, as did
Hmm.
he. But it was very, very disruptive
Right.
for his school. If he went high or low, he'd have to leave the classroom. He couldn't manage his own diabetes being so young, so he'd have to
Yes.
leave to go to the nurse. And the nurse would have to treat him, and then he'd have to come back. And he ended up missing quite a lot. Obviously, education is this cumulative, incremental, and that was a big trouble. And as I mentioned earlier, the glucose sensors, that was a
Hmm.
big change in keeping him in the classroom. And then more recently, he's on an insulin pump, and
Right.
he's also on a management where the called a closed loop system, where the pump and the sensor talk to each other, and
Hmm.
there's some level of automation so that when his levels start to go up, the pump is told to give him a bit more, and when it goes down, it reduces. So that has really been a huge change to keep him in the classroom.
Right.
But above and beyond that, something I think that isn't widely understood is that both hypo and hyper, high and low blood sugar levels really, really affect mood and
Hmm.
really affect concentration.
Right.
So an episode of hypoglycemia, so if you go under 4 millimole of your
Hmm.
blood sugar level, which is technically what's referred to as hypoglycemia, it takes up to 15 minutes. It can take 15 minutes to treat that low. Once he takes glucose tabs, it can take about 15 minutes for his blood sugar to come up. If it's a particularly deep low, it might take longer. Hypoglycemia means that his body doesn't have enough glucose to power his organs, and that includes his brain. So he's not going to be concentrating when he's hypoglycemic, and he is going to be feeling like his vision can go blurry. Literally, his hearing can go, sounds like he's in a bucket and he can't really hear things very well. So to be in a classroom in that moment when he's hypoglycemic is very challenging. And then even once he's come back into range, his blood sugars come back into range, I read some studies that it can take up to 45 minutes for everything to sort of come back into normal functioning state. So that's one episode of hypoglycemia in a classroom. Hyperglycemia, similar things. You have very high blood sugars. Different people experience them in different ways, but you can, I've heard it described as feeling like you're stuck in glue. Everything becomes very slow and you can become very irritable. And so, putting a 13-year-old in a classroom learning algebra is one thing, but putting a 13-year-old with hypoglycemia trying to learn algebra is another thing. The change from primary school to secondary school was a big change, right? In primary school, Asher was in a one-form entry school where everyone knew he had type 1. They were incredibly caring, and all of his challenges and needs were met. When you suddenly go to primary school, there are more children in the year group than there were in his entire school. Yes. And he moves from classroom to classroom, different teachers, substitute teachers, and suddenly he's sitting in the classroom and he's taking glucose tabs and the teacher says, "Hey, stop eating in the classroom." And he has to be able to say in an episode of hypoglycemia, I'm type 1 diabetes. What does that do for him socially, that he has to identify himself to his peers? It's quite a profound challenge in school. I have to say as well, we're very fortunate. His school is excellent. They're very supportive. He also has I don't think he uses it because he doesn't want to be different. But he has a card that he's able to put on his desk, which are given to children with health conditions, so that straight away a teacher, a substitute teacher, whoever happens to be the adult in the classroom, is able to identify if a child is eating something or needs a moment. They understand that there's a card on the desk and they can give a little leeway. The school is challenging.
Yeah. And how has he coped with this condition over the years? And how's he getting on?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, I'm biased because I'm his father. So I'm, along with my wife, we're his #1 fans. He is a remarkable young man. He has demonstrated real resilience and strength of character. We'll never really know how much of Asher's personality today is 100% Asher's personality, regardless of what would have happened to him, and how much type 1 has helped to influence things. But he is very diligent, very conscientious, and on the whole has accepted and incorporated his type 1 management in his life in a very positive way. We have, though, and that's what's really led me today to think about making these films, seen quite a lot of emotional challenge, particularly sort of psychosocial challenges, especially since he's gone to secondary school. Desire to fit in, to be normal, and that has been quite a profound change. It was about 2 years ago, I think, that he had a terrifying case of hyperglycemia. We were on holiday. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. He ended up in the emergency room, and if someone with type 1 diabetes stays in hyperglycemia for too long, the risk is going into what's called DKA, diabetic ketone acidosis. Many people who present with type 1 for the first time are often in DKA. It's very dangerous. he was in the early stages of DKA when we were into hospital. It's very unpleasant. The vomiting, feel awful, and then on the way down, you have to have a huge amount of insulin to bring you down. Luckily, he avoided having a drip, infused insulin and going on a drip, and we had, thankfully, he didn't get to that spot. But then the huge amount of insulin, you to bring him down very quickly, and that massive drop of blood sugar, even though he never went hypoglycemic, also made him feel awful. So he had this really awful experience when we were on holiday 2 summers ago now. And about 2 weeks after we got back, we were sitting having lunch with some family, and out of nowhere, he expressed this deep existential angst. What it was presented as an interesting topic of conversation around the table, but it floored everyone. All of the adults around the table literally had their mouths open looking at him in silence because they did not know how to respond, including myself. And the basic gist of it was, what's the point? What is the meaning of life? And what is the point? And it was not I think he was 10 at the time, maybe nearly 11. It wasn't a kid, playing with the idea of a grown-up idea, of a profound idea, and they'd sort of seen it in a film or thought about it and were intellectually turning it over. This was a lived experience of feeling that he had been close to death in some way or another, and that this was something that could happen to him again, and probably would happen to him again. And it was all, because a few things had gone wrong, which could happen any day. And therefore, living with this, I don't think he had thought that through in that conscious way, but it had come out in this very profound question. And so on the one hand, to answer your question, Asher is doing amazingly. He's resilient, he's happy, he's social, he's got loads of friends, he's doing very well. On the other hand, we see this deep existential questioning and thoughts there that, as he's going into the teen years and getting older, we are very conscious of how that may develop as well.
Right. And that's totally understandable, because being a child, he has gone through a lot of experiences that most of us haven't. I hope I get a chance to meet with Asher someday and tell him how brave he is. And he's such an amazing child, and he's doing so wonderfully well.
Thank you. Yeah.
And that leads me to the next section of the discussion, which is the inspiration behind Type 1, your ambitious project. So now we know what inspired you to take your personal experiences and turn them into a project as ambitious and meaningful as Type 1. Could you talk about this project a little bit more and tell our audience, what is this project all about?
Absolutely. So the title of the film series is Type 1, WON, rather than ONE, Type 1. And so I'm a filmmaker, and I had always wanted to make some films about Type 1 diabetes, but it was very, very close to the bone. And I always held it at arm's length. I thought, you know what, that's interesting, and maybe someone will do that. And, it was a bit too close. But as we've come to this, or I've come to this real appreciation that the main challenge for Asher is going to be this emotional, this psychological challenge of carrying this burden. I thought, well, what can I do about this? What's in the past I researched, glucose monitors and closed loop systems, and got all of our things. And there was, when I thought about this issue and this problem, I had nothing to help. And the more that we talked with other parents, caregivers, and other people living with Type 1, they all said the same thing. They said, well, there isn't a huge amount to do. There isn't a huge amount there, tools. And so I'm a filmmaker, and this is the way that I understand how to confront and address challenging issues, and also to talk about them. because so much of this is about dialogue, about advocacy. So I decided to make a series of films that wouldn't be bleeding heart films. Isn't type 1 living with type 1 terrible? I think everyone knows it's not a walk in the park, but really to make films that helped people that come to the understanding that it took me a while to come to, which is that type 1 is a very challenging condition, but the main thing is this emotional burden. And actually, we need to develop an understanding, but also some practical tools, programs that can help address and meet this need, this profound need. We have had the most amazing diabetic care team through the hospital. They really have been fantastic. I know that's not everyone's experience around the country, around the world, but ours has been. They've been brilliant. But still, even with this amazing care team, we have all these great resources to manage Asher's blood glucose levels, but very few or no resources to help his emotional and psychological world. So really, that was the desire to these films, was to help reframe type 1 as profoundly an emotional and psychological health condition and the impacts of that. And unless we address those in equal measure alongside the insulin therapies and the blood glucose regulation, we're doing a disservice to people living with type 1.
Right. And you also mentioned about this interesting concept of pairing the younger children with teens who also have type 1 diabetes. It's a unique concept. How did you come up with this idea, and what do you believe, and why do you believe it's so impactful?
Absolutely. So as I said, I didn't just want to make some films that were, our poor me, look at type 1 diabetes, isn't it sad? I wanted to make some films that had some practical applications that we could start to talk about and think about and use. So I'm a filmmaker. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a clinician in any way, shape or form. But everyone that I've spoken to has said that actually what works, what does make an impact, is one, self-advocacy, to be able to tell your own story, to express, to articulate your inner world is incredibly impactful. And two, community, finding other people who get you, who understand, and whether that's peers or a wider community, to feel seen and understood and not alone. So those two things I wanted to bring into the films as well. So the films, the idea is to have 5 films, and then each film will pair a younger and a slightly older person living with type 1. So the first third of the film will tell the younger person's story. All short films, under 10 minutes, hopefully shorter than that. So the first third of the film will tell their story, celebrate them. That's where the type 1 WON comes in, right? When a child, especially with type 1, scores a goal or aces a test, that's great, but they're also doing that while they're managing type 1.
Exactly.
So they really are winning in a double sense of the word. So that's why it's called type 1. And in the second third of the film, we'll do the same thing, tell the story of the slightly older type 1 person with type 1, and see the slight differences in what comes with age. And then in the final third of the film, bring the two of them together in an ad hoc, one-off meeting, but a meeting around a shared experience. So we'll be doing a lot of very, very careful pairing so that we have interesting personalities who are the right ages, but also that they have some sort of shared interest, whether it be a sport, a pastime, whatever it is. Bring the two of them together. Don't tell them that they're meeting someone else with diabetes. Don't tell them that it's, they'll understand it about the project, but just bring them together to play football together in a park. Bring them together to go see their favorite movie together, whatever it might be. And the idea being that everything will happen in that moment. The younger one will look up. I don't know if you have kids or you have children around you that you've witnessed that moment when their older cousin or a older relative or a family friend comes, the big kid, they want to be in their shadow, they want to be looking up to them, they follow them around, their, you know, anything they can do is their face lights up at seeing them. And so there's that, suddenly will be that moment that, wow, this big kid who I immediately emulate just because they're big, larger than me, they also have type 1, and look, they're fabulous. And there'll be that all of those implicit messages that will come with that. And for the older one, they'll look at the younger person with type 1 and say, wow, that was me not that long ago, and look how far I've come, look how much I have to offer them. Not talking about diabetes, but just as a role model, all implicit. I have no desire to create films where anyone, you know, tells someone how to do something, or they, you know, talk about how do you do this? How do I do that? Maybe that will happen. But I want it all to be that implicit connection where I really feel like when they find each other and they understand, you'll read it all in their emotions, you'll read it all in their faces and their interactions. Yes. And that's the series that I'm hoping to create.
Wow, that is such an incredibly powerful idea and concept. I can't wait to see one of those series or the episodes that you're working on.
Me too.
How are you incorporating both emotional and psychological perspectives into the storytelling to make the series authentic and relatable?
It's an excellent question. I have a lot of experience in documentary, in narrative filmmaking, and so some of that is just down to directorial technique, documentary technique, and especially with children, it's about building trust. It's about really allowing them to express themselves, to feel really comfortable, to get them in there. Literally the outfits that they like the most, along with the music they like the most, and their toys that they like the most, or whatever age they're at, to get them in their milieu, in their moment, in their place that they are most expressing themselves, surrounded by their posters in their bedroom or kicking a ball outside, whatever, to get them in their strongest place. And then I guess it's quite simple in a way, but it's, you know, something that's taken me a long time to do in my own life, but in professionally as well, is to really ask very, very open questions that are very focused. And that's a real art, I think, to lead someone to what you want them to talk about, but to let them arrive there themselves. And then on a technical sense in the filmmaking as well is documentary, but I want to bring to the series a real style. And that style will also to be incorporating graphics, motion graphics, that will help to express their inner world externally. So if a child talks about the different pressures that are happening to them, we'll be filming them with quite a lot of open space around them for us to bring graphics in to help to portray, to visualize what those actually look like as well. So a combination of open questions, narrative style, filmmaking, and then also with some visual stylistic choices as well.
Right. What role do you see the series playing in bridging the gap between patients, healthcare providers, and the general public?
Getting a series like this off the ground is no mean feat. So I have really two ambitions. One ambition is to make the series, and that's the little ambition, if you could say that, although it's no small feat. To the larger ambition is to really make an impact in a meaningful way, so that these films are a conversation starter for everyone, for the general public, for anyone. People living with type 1 can feel seen and understood, but also for those people working in pharmaceutical companies, in medtech, in healthcare, policymakers can really help them. They all know this already. They know that, you know, I'm not telling them something they don't know, but really that the need to have practical solutions to the emotional and psychological burden are as important as the insulin therapies that exist, and that we need some some change in provision. Unless that's done,
Mm.
we're going to continue to see people struggle. We're going to continue to see higher prevalences of complications, of diabetes burnout, of diabetes distress, of all of the, particularly the complications, the physical complications. There is, I think, a direct line between numbers of complications, retinopathy, kidney problems, heart problems, feet problems, you name it, all of the diabetes complications. There's a direct line between those and the numbers that are experienced in the UK population, global population,
Sure.
and emotional and psychological help.
Right.
And there's a direct line there. So it's a cost-saving thing. It's something that's going
Yes.
to help everyone. And I think that's really what I hope to come out of this. And I think lastly, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. This is, we don't need to make a think tank or a new white paper, or we just need to bring the things that we already know work to everyone, to make them all accessible.
So, Simon, looking back, what has been the most rewarding part of this project that you're working on?
That's an excellent question. I think it's probably twofold. On the one hand, it's made me connect with my son, with Asher, in a new way, which has been immensely rewarding. I have considered him and spoken to him in a way that was probably long overdue, given his age, and always with your children reinventing your relationship
Yes.
with them as they grow. And so this was an excellent catalyst for a new round of that. I asked him questions, thinking about the questions that I want to be asking the participants. I asked him, and I learned things that I didn't know and hadn't. I think part of me didn't want to ask him, like what his fears are going forward and that kind of thing. But that's been immensely rewarding. So coming closer to him in that way has been very rewarding. And the other thing by far is I have spoken to, I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe approaching 100, maybe over, people who work in healthcare professionals, or they're people living with type 1, or they have their skin in the game in some way or another around type 1. And what an amazing bunch of people, inspirational. I've learned so much. I've made some amazing connections, and that's been hugely rewarding.
Right. And before we conclude this episode, what message would you like to leave with our listeners, both those directly affected by type 1 diabetes and those who may not be familiar with it?
So the message that I'd like to leave people with is diabetes is not just about sugar. It's not just about injections. Really, diabetes is about managing a lifelong health condition that is with you for every second of every day. So when you meet people with type 1, if you know anyone with type 1, think about that. Have that in the forefront of your mind when they look a bit bleary-eyed or whatever it is. That is the biggest thing about type 1 is that emotional burden, that psychological burden. It's not just the injections and sugar. Diabetes is a profound lifelong health condition.
Well, that's a beautiful message, Simon. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your deeply personal journey and the incredible work you've been doing through type 1. Your insights into the emotional and psychological dimensions of type 1 diabetes have been eye opening for me and for our audience. And your vision for creating meaningful connections and sparking change is not short of inspiring. I want to wish you all the best as you continue with this ambitious and much needed project. It's clear that type 1 has the potential to make a profound impact, not just on the type 1 diabetes community, but on how we, as a society, understand and support those living with this condition. And to our listeners, if you are as moved as I am by Simon's story and his mission, I encourage you to get involved. Whether you are from the healthcare, pharmaceutical, or medtech industries, or simply someone passionate about making a difference, there is an opportunity here to support a project that has the power to transform lives. If you'd like to explore any sponsorship or partnership opportunities with Type 1, please reach out to Simon through the links we'll include in the episode notes. Together, we can help amplify these voices and create a brighter future for those living with type 1 diabetes. And with that, we would like to end our today's episode. Simon, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you very much for having me, Kaushik.
Thank you.